Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.
Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers, co-host Keith Myers. Hey, Keith.
Hey, Bill. So we are here today to talk about what was a fairly disappointing game for the Seahawks against Kansas City, but it wasn't all negative. There's some positives that I think we can take away from this game, but overall, disappointing game. Seahawks go down 24-10 on the road in Kansas City.
Yeah, it didn't seem, obviously, when I was predicting the Seahawks have lost 5 of 6 even before the game, I was fully expecting us to lose this game. And quite frankly, it was a lot closer than I thought. At least the ability for the Seahawks to keep the score close, to keep the time of possession close, the ability to run the ball at times, especially after the half. Seattle continued to have that commitment, which I was happy with. And then I thought the defense kind of showed up. But honestly, Keith, I always had the feeling that at any time, if pressed, Kansas City was just able to kind of step on the gas and pull away. And they never really had to, so they didn't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Although the one thing that gave me some hope and made me really positive about the defensive performance was the number of 3-and-outs that they forced. It wasn't that, they got stops because they're running the ball on 3rd and 6, and rather than, doing normal Patrick Mahomes things, they were trying to run their offense, and the Seahawks were getting 3-and-outs. So that was good. That was great to see. But yeah, the offense didn't show up until the second half, and they were running the ball, but Geno just could not, he just couldn't get it going. Without Tyler Lockett there to help him out, it was kind of a mess.
Yeah, early in the second quarter, the Seahawks were down 14-0, but for quite a bit after that, until almost all the way through to the fourth quarter, Seahawks held the Chiefs to an additional 3 points. They forced 6 punts, and held the Chiefs to 77 yards rushing on 22 attempts. I thought was good. So yeah, the defense showed up. The offense is interesting. My overarching question that I wanted to talk to you about after this game was, where are you at with the whole Geno Smith thing? We talked about, we were sitting in October going, wow, this is Geno Smith. We've won 4 games in a row. This is who he is now because we have a large enough sample. We're talking about extensions and contracts in the offseason and what that might look like. Now it seems like we've kind of fallen back to earth. Everyone's breathing a sigh of relief that we didn't extend him mid-season, and it seems like he's a guy that can lead this team with a better infusion of talent overall. But also, if we have a better defense and we're giving our offense more opportunities, that's also more opportunities for the offense to falter a little bit. So. What are your thoughts?
The one thing that's changed, his completion percentage is still pretty good. His yards per attempt is still pretty good. The difference is he's turning the ball over every game now. And that you can't do that, especially on a Pete Carroll team. Again, in this one, they had a chance to claw their way back in it, and he throws a really awful pick in the end zone. That, took away a good drive where, Ken Walker really got it going. They got themselves down there, and the whole thing was for nothing because Geno throws just a terrible pass in the end zone that gets picked off. And at some point, you can't make those plays. You cannot have that. And he's been doing it game after game after game in the second half of the season. And honestly,
and historically, he's that player. I mean, historically, he had a touchdown to turnover ratio that was about 50-50, and it's hard I mean, I was really excited for the guy. And I still am. I think that he's earned some sort of second chance opportunity beyond this season to start for an NFL team. The question is it Seattle? I still think so, but I wouldn't mortgage the future with him. I would still possibly now take a look at drafting a quarterback that could potentially be able to compete for that spot out of training camp and possibly take over mid-season if things start to go sideways. Seahawks have a real chance this offseason, as we've talked about several times, of improving the roster to a point where they can be pretty competitive next year. And it would be a shame if we went in with Geno thinking we were going to get a certain Geno, and it just didn't happen for whatever reason. And Seattle needs a backup plan better than Drew Lock.
Yeah. So you look at what's going on with the draft and stuff, and Denver has quit. I mean, they got beat. They gave up 51 to Baker Mayfield and the ghost of the LA Rams.
6 sacks in that game and 3 interceptions.
Yeah.
That's rough.
The entire team has just quit on the coaching staff and on Russ. And so the Seahawks are going to have at worst the 3rd pick. We need Chicago to get a win, so they can crawl back up a spot. But with the 3rd pick, you're going to get a quarterback. It sounds a lot like the Texans are going to take Bryce Young. And so you've got a shot at CJ Stroud or Will Levis. And I think at this point, with what Geno's shown us over the last 6 weeks, you got to do it. You've got to go ahead and pull the trigger on that. I would still re-sign him, but I would re-sign him to a 1 or 2 year deal as a bridge. Make sure that you can get out of it after a year. If the quarterback
interesting.
Pops.
It's real interesting, Keith. And I think this, obviously it's going to require the next 3 months really to kind of break down quarterbacks. And not just for us, but for the entire Seahawks scouting staff and front office, because that's a huge thing that you just kind of went into there, where we don't know how the Seahawks are evaluating this quarterback class and Will Levis and Stroud and Bryce Young, et cetera, and where it makes sense to take one if you do, and what the value is there. And you take a look at those top 2 defenders and Will Anderson and Jalen Carter, and that comes into the equation, and dropping back for additional draft capital because there are so many different holes that the team would really like to address. And so I'm not sure it's so clear cut as that, where you've got this opportunity, but are one of those 2 guys you mentioned the future that John Schneider thinks they have in the NFL and for this team? I don't know. I can't answer that yet.
Yeah, but the alternative question is Geno.
No,
especially from what we've seen the last 6 weeks.
No, but you take a look, for example, at the playoff quarterbacks in the AFC and the NFC. Half of them are not first-round draft picks. There are other ways to get to a quarterback solution now with that. And you take a look at the year prior, Keith, you don't have to go very far to see that the quarterbacks that was potentially supposed to be one of the best quarterback classes we have seen in 10 years. Only one of those guys has really emerged so far.
I'd say there's 2, at least, but because if you've been paying attention, Trevor Lawrence is really matured into the guy that they were hoping would be.
That was the year before, but I agree with you. But my point, I guess, is it's hard. It's a lot harder than just saying this is the solution. We got to go spend the number 3 overall pick on a quarterback, and that's going to solve a problem that could potentially cause even more problems, depending on what we surround him with.
Yeah, if you're talking about last year was there were no quarterbacks. There was one quarterback that was taken in the first round, and he shouldn't have gone there.
Year prior.
Yeah, so the year prior. So you've got 5 quarterbacks taken early, and Zach Wilson has looked bad, and everyone else has kind of been decent. Even Fields, who was kind of the last one, has really just emerged, and he's on a terrible team with no talent, but he's like a bright spot for Chicago there. And so, yeah, I don't, not every quarterback class is going to have great ones, but this quarterback class, there are three guys that look like they could be NFL quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So, and you got to look at that and go, you got the 3rd overall pick. You're going to be able to get one of these 3 quarterbacks. Unless one of them has got like serious off-field, like maturity, Baker Mayfield, Johnny Manziel kind of issues, I think you got to pull the trigger on one, because they've lost 5 out of 6, and Geno has not played well in any of these games. At what point do we admit that he is part of the problem?
Yeah, he's part of the problem. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, but I think when you take a look at the entire roster and you take a look at the interior of the offensive line and the defensive line, we both know that those are central to the problem. And so that's an issue. I agree to a certain extent, but there's other quarterbacks in the draft as well. It's hard because you made this argument early in, say, September, if I remember correctly, and we were talking about the defense being so bad, and at that time, and I was advocating for taking a pass rusher or something like that. And you said, yeah, those guys are going to impact the team, but there's really only one position on the team that's as important as a quarterback, and that's a quarterback. And when you have the opportunity to take one, you do. Seattle's in a very unique situation where they've got Denver's pick. Denver looks awful. You're right. It's going to be at least top 5, maybe top 3, maybe number 1. What do you do? What do you do in that situation? Geno is definitely a placeholder. I don't think he's the future. Would I like to have seen him play better down the stretch here? Yeah, that would have made me feel a lot better heading into this draft. Now I feel like we're back to where we were kind of prior to those 4 games where he kind of went off, and we were thinking we could get by with Geno for 3 years. Now I'm not so sure. Now I'm back to we could get by with Geno for 1 more year. And we need something in place after that. And it's the best case scenario is to have Geno and a rookie to where you can have some mentoring there and some training, and eventually they can step in. So, wow. I mean, a huge off-season conversation for sure.
I look at this and I go, well, if there's one takeaway from me, it's that, Geno was super supportive of Drew Lock, even though it was Geno's job. Everyone was asking him about Drew Lock, and he was super supportive. He was Russell's backup, and, went into that role prepared like a starter, did his job, learned what he needed to learn, and all of that. He sounds like the kind of guy who, he was given his chance to start this year. He'll probably get a big raise for next year. But to come in, be the starter, and allow a rookie to develop and then come in, I think he's the kind of guy to take that and do it really well and actually help the rookie really develop. He just seems like he's kind of got that maturity to him. And
I agree with that.
And I think that kind of needs to be the path forward. I think his price tag has come way down over the last 6 weeks. You were talking 35 million, in that range.
No, not 30, but 30. Yeah, 30.
Well, yeah. So 31 is the franchise tag. I think we're looking more at 20. And
I agree.
And I think that you can do a lot more with him being at 20, but you sign him 20 million on a 1-year deal, and you can even make it, 40 million over 2 years, but he only gets 11 of it
guaranteed or something.
Or 11 of it in year 1, and then he gets cut after that. So, or reworks the deal. So you know what I mean? So you make it work for the team and all of that, and the agent. You give them those void years or whatever, and I think they can get by. But to me, the one question that I've been answered over this losing streak has been, he isn't the solution. He isn't a guy that you invest in and have him lead you to a Super Bowl. He's too mistake prone.
I think that we can actually take that argument and put it to bed. I really do. I think you're exactly right. We've answered that we've came into this season with a whole bunch of questions, looking for answers, particularly who are we going to take into the future? Who is this team going to build around? And I think for a while there, Geno wasn't necessarily somebody you build around, but it was somebody you could contend with while you build the roster. And then you could take your time evaluating a quarterback or taking somebody in a later round that maybe needed some more time, and go that route, which would have been optimal. But here we are. Now the Seahawks have this pretty sizable decision to make, because these things, as you mentioned, don't come along very often where you're drafting so high and you're able to take a premier player. Not just quarterback, though, Keith. This defense is bad as well, and bordering on historically bad. I mean, and they only managed 1 sack and 3 pressures on Mahomes. Now, I get it. It's Kansas City. They're a really good roster and so forth. But
that offensive line is good, and it's Mahomes. He's amazing.
You can extrapolate that for the majority of the season. We just haven't done well. We had a stretch where we were doing well. We had 19 sacks in 3 games or something like that, and all of a sudden it's just gone away. So, for me, it always starts with the defense, but I get it. It's the quarterback, and that's the deal. I just don't know. It's so hard, Keith, because in the draft you can draft one, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, the biggest draft busts in history come from the quarterback position.
Yes, but they're also drafted by bad teams that are completely dysfunctional. And you're not going to get a top pick that's drafted by an actually good organization that flames out. It just doesn't happen. Right? Go look at all of the notoriously awful picks. They were made by notoriously awful franchises. And that's kind of the story of it. Do you consider Seattle as a completely awful, dysfunctional franchise? I don't. Not under Pete Carroll, they haven't been. And, with John Snyder, his ability to evaluate, I trust this organization to make a good choice there. And that's why I'm not necessarily just, let's play the odds and, you got whatever percentage of getting your quarterback. If they say that the guy that's available at 3 isn't their guy because they believe he's going to flame out, I'll trust that. But at the same time, they do need an answer at the quarterback, and it's not Geno Smith. The defense you can make a massive improvement to your defense with the 14th pick and 2 picks in the second round and a pick in the third round, and fourth round picks, can be great at linebacker. You can only really get quarterback high if you want him to play within the first year or two, and you're not going to find him elsewhere. So you're in the position, go get him.
So that, the reason that I'm hesitating just a little bit is that that really is going against the narrative that we've built up over the last 10 weeks. And I'm not talking just you and I'm just talking in general around the team. Everyone that's talking, this is where Seattle really needs help on the defensive line. Jalen Carter's might as well put his name on the card right now and run it up to the podium. So what you're saying is just a rethink of the entire strategy, at least to me, because I really haven't thought about the quarterback position at number 3 yet, even though Geno's been struggling. And now what you're saying is, well, I definitely have, and I'm thinking this is the way the franchise needs to go. And I'm open to that. I really am. I would just be hesitant.
Jalen Carter in the middle of that defense would be awesome. But Jalen Carter in the middle of that defense is not going to make this a Super Bowl team. Because you're not a
Neither will a quarterback in the first year or two.
I don't know. Russell made the Seahawks Super Bowl caliber team his first year. That pass rush just disappeared in the playoffs, and they gave up a lead with 32 seconds left to Atlanta. And the second year they won it. So I'm if you build the roster, I'm not. I don't believe that. I just think that you are not a Super Bowl contender unless you've got the guy at quarterback. The Rams figured that out. That's why they made the move that they did. The 49ers figured that out. That's why they've tried multiple different ways to get a quarterback. At some point, you don't want to be in that quarterback purgatory spot where you have a great roster but can't get there because you have to have a quarterback in this league.
If I was to ask you in mid-October when we were in the middle of our run, if Geno Smith could be good enough to take us into the playoffs and get us to a Super Bowl, what would you have said?
I would have said, yeah, because he was playing at that level.
And now I ask you the same question. What do you say?
No.
If we surround him with a better roster.
You can't you're not going to surround him with a more talented offense. You've got.
I mean, the interior of our offensive line is crap.
That's true, but offensive lines across the league are awful. But he's got 3 really good tight ends. He's got 2 of the top 20 receivers in the NFL. He's got a dynamic athlete at running back who can just take over games. They've given him a lot to work with. The offensive roster is in great shape. And they're losing games in part because he's turning the ball over a lot. Now the defense is bad. But they can fix the defense with the other picks. You can't fix quarterback unless you take one early.
Unless you just luck out.
Yeah, because you can go through and do the Mike Holmgren approach and take a quarterback in the 4th to 7th round every year and hope that one of them eventually is good enough and develops enough. But the Seahawks aren't in a position to do that. They've been in that position for years under Russ, but they didn't do it. And now they're in this position. But I equate this back to the Colts. Peyton Manning hurts his neck, has to have neck surgery. He misses a year. And suddenly this team that is a perennial Super Bowl contender is picking first in the draft. And they went out and got Andrew Luck. And it allowed that franchise to look forward for another 10 years. Now, Luck he was good when he was playing, but he ended up injury prone and then eventually called it quits early because he just got tired of being injured. But he was still a franchise quarterback in terms of talent. So they had that situation. They had the situation the Seahawks are in now. They're a good team with a really high pick. I think you pull the trigger.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes, I can see that. And I would be on board with that for sure. I would also be on board with the idea that you'd mentioned earlier. If they decide they don't like a quarterback that early, would rather drop back a little bit. Maybe Will Levis is there at 10 or something. I can see that happening as well.
Or if they really like a guy like Michael Penix Jr. and he's available, I think he's got a 3rd round grade, so you probably have to take him with your
this year. He's declared he's going.
Oh, he's declared he's going back. See that that hurts because him, Bo Nix is going back. There's a couple other guys that are returning to college, and now you've really taken that middle, that second tier of quarterbacks, and you've just decimated it.
Yeah, you've got the Herndon from Tennessee has the ACL, and Richardson, who not everyone is sold on that he's even an NFL quality prospect.
He is not an NFL thrower. He is his ceiling is Jalen Hurts 2 years ago.
I disagree.
he doesn't throw the ball. And when he does, he very rarely hits his target. He's just
he's got a beautiful ball. I mean, he can throw any NFL ball. He just needs fundamentally sound.
Yeah, he
footwork
just needs
and so forth.
He just needs to completely rework his entire mechanics.
I don't know. I mean, go look at his throws. I mean, they look fantastic. I don't know that the mechanic issue is the problem. I think it's his feet, but
he
needs a little bit of
53% of his passes.
That offense needs help around him. He doesn't have it, and doesn't have a great quarterback coach. We'll see.
And Will Levis is on a trash team Will Levis is on a trash team with trash talent around him. And look at his stats.
He's much better, more equipped, and NFL ready than Richardson is. But who's going to have the better career? I don't know yet.
Richardson's probably who's the guy in the Saints? They're like gadget player / quarterback.
Really? Taysom
Hill. I think that's how Richardson is.
Oh my goodness, Keith. We'll have a conversation. Well, this will be great because I think this is one of those situations where I think I'm going to be able to move you from a 4th round grade on Richardson to a 1st round grade by the time April 1st rolls around. That's my goal.
And I think I'm going to be able to move you from saying that this guy's a 1st round quarterback to recognizing that if he's a 1st round quarterback, he's going to be an absolute Dan McGuire style bust.
Interesting. Jamarcus Russell. Yeah. So back to the Seahawks. So here we are. This is kind of a post-game discussion, but obviously we're just kind of ranting. The Seahawks still have this weird opportunity at 7-8 of possibly getting into the playoffs. Now they're in a situation now where they need a little bit of help. Detroit, Green Bay are sitting there as
they
well.
Got some help. They got a bunch of help this week.
They got a little bit of help, but Green Bay kind of came back into this conversation, and they have the easier schedule. I think they play Minnesota at Green Bay, and then their last game. But we need a little bit of help.
Washington lost, the Giants lost, and Detroit lost. So, Seattle losing, all of those things helped Green Bay out. It gets Green Bay back in the
Giants are at Indianapolis. Washington is at home against Cleveland. Those are 2 wins right there on those 2 teams.
I don't know.
Yeah, and so I think that, the Giants have the inside track to me, and the Seahawks could win 2 games and still not make it. Mm-hmm. They need some help. So Washington and the Giants and Detroit and Green Bay would all have to lose in order for me to be comfortable that Seattle would have a shot. If any of those teams win this next week, it's really hard for Seattle. Even if they were to beat the Jets, they would have to have a lot going on to get in after that. And if they lose one of these 2 games, I think Seattle's done. They're out.
Oh yeah, they are. Do you think Tampa makes the playoffs with a losing record?
Mm-hmm. Because they're going to win the division.
They're going to win the division with probably 8 wins, 8 and 10.
8 and 9.
Or 8 and 9. It'll be 8 and 10 because they're not beating anyone in the playoffs.
That's funny. Yeah. They probably do. I mean, there's really nobody else there. They're the 4th seed in the NFC. It's similar to what Seattle did when they went 7-9.
Yeah, it is exactly the same as what Seattle did. They went 7-9. They were the least bad team in a really bad division. Although Seattle went on, since they were hosting, Beastquake game, beat the defending champions. God, that game was fun.
So let's talk about the Seattle team again. So, here's the overarching deal. We just don't have enough talent. you mentioned, Gino's surrounded with this roster. I agree to a certain extent, but man, does offensive center and offensive guard really matter in the NFL? Yeah, it apparently does, because that's really where the holes are on the offense, and I think it does hold the offense back. Now, granted, Ken Walker the third was able to run the ball pretty nicely, especially in the second half against Kansas City. But I'll argue again that Kansas City really wasn't there to play Seattle very difficult. They just wanted to get the win, and it was pretty easy for them, to be completely honest.
Well, I mean, the offense worked in the second half because Ken Walker was running the ball well.
I totally agree.
When Ken Walker isn't running the ball well, the offense doesn't work at all. And that's what we've seen for the last few weeks, because Gino can't carry the team. And
not every week he can't.
Yeah. And so he just isn't. And when even though they were running the ball and the offense was working and it started to really click because, Ken Walker was going, what happened?
Can I stop you for a second?
Interception in the end zone.
Can I stop you? Sure. Like, how familiar does this conversation sound to you over the last 5 years?
No,
like we talked about Russell Wilson carrying the team. The difference was Russell Wilson could carry the team.
Yes.
Well, now but we've had these same issues for year in, year out now for a long time.
Yeah, we've had these same issues year in, year out. And the Seahawks have notoriously had one of the worst offensive lines in football year in and year out because they didn't invest in the position. But this year they finally did. And they got him a couple of tackles that can really play. Now, granted, one of them's dropped off quite a bit. But
in fact, I saw Gabe Jackson just get abused in this game.
Yeah. Gabe Jackson struggled. Blythe has been genuinely not good. Yeah. They need to upgrade those two spots. But at the same time, you should be able to run the ball to the left side. Right?
You would think. Lewis has not been playing as well either. I mean, let's just be honest. Our interior of the offensive line is either NFL middling or worse.
Yeah, I mean, Lewis has been the best of the three, and he's been below average.
I'd love to see him move back over to the right side and get a left guard. I think he's just more suited over on the right. He played better there, so why not just go do it? But overall, you should still be able to run the ball to the left because it's the right guard, the center. That's where you're hurting them most. You should be able to run the ball to the left, and they still can't do that. Why? Consistently. Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think that they need some help in the interior, but the offense isn't a long way away. Talent-wise, if you think Gino is a capable quarterback, then they're what? A center and maybe a guard?
Yes. Yeah, I think that we could make the playoffs and do some work in the playoffs with the existing offense plus a center and guard. Absolutely. I think that would help. Obviously, we need a complete revamp on the defense. I think there's 2, maybe 3 players that you can carry forward in this defense, and you really need to go out and get 7 new starters in free agency and the draft to completely rebuild this defense. Now, I don't necessarily know if the scheme is great yet because the players are so bad. The talent is so bad. I haven't seen the scheme work the way it's supposed to yet. So I have to reserve. It's kind of like the offense last year. The offense was so bad. We thought Shane Waldron should be exit. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I don't agree that Clint Hurts should be over after 1 year of having this talent deficit that we have. I think that we do need a complete revamp on the defensive line. A couple linebackers, maybe a strong safety come in and possibly replace Quandre Diggs at free safety in the starting position. I'm talking 5, 6 defensive starters. I think that this team needs. That's why I'm hesitant in this draft scenario you're talking about, where we take a quarterback at 3 overall. I just don't know that we're that close, as a team, as a roster to get a quarterback like that.
If you don't, and you take, Carter at 3, and you get a cornerback, at 14, and then you take a middle linebacker and a defensive end in the second round, and you rebuild the defense, and next year you're good, and you get into the playoffs, maybe win a game in the playoffs, but you're not a Super Bowl contender. You will never have another opportunity. Do you think Geno
is less of a quarterback than Jared Goff?
I think he's similar in a quarterback to Jared Goff.
With a little bit extra. There's just a little bit extra there with Geno. But what I'm saying is I think Geno with a really good defense more weapons. Could do it.
Jared Goff could get them there, but then couldn't win it. Jimmy Garoppolo could get them there, but couldn't win it. Geno Smith could probably get them there, but one of these bad turnovers that he's had every week for the last 6 weeks.
My point though is going to be could we get a quarterback later? Say it's Herndon from Tennessee or Richardson, mold them for a year. Geno's the quarterback. We get close. We're not quite there. And then the following year we're ready as a roster to build around a second year quarterback.
So the team that I would emulate in terms of how to make this work is Kansas City, the team we just played. Because they had a good roster. They had a good quarterback, not a great quarterback, but a good quarterback at Alex Smith. They made runs into the playoffs. They still took Patrick Mahomes.
But Patrick Mahomes went what? Mid first round?
Yeah, it was like 14th.
So if somebody like Will Levis came down and fell to us with our second pick in the first round, I think that would be fantastic. To me, that makes a ton of sense. I'm just not so sold. I'm not sold yet on picking so high with a quarterback. And until I get the evaluation process done in our offseason together, where we go through the quarterback class and we kind of know if a CJ Stroud or even Bryce Young, as small as he is, would be the greatest fit, or Will Levis. That remains to be seen to me. But because it's such a huge decision, that decision to take a quarterback at 3 and have him sit when you have immediate needs and need impact right away, that's a really hard thing to do as a franchise. It might be the best option and the optimal situation, but I have to get there, and I'm not there yet.
You've got multiple first-round picks. It's easier. Because if we didn't have that pick at 14 right now, and it was just 3, man, that's so much harder, because you've got to rebuild that defense. The defense is terrible. And
yeah, but as you've seen, at least in initial mocks, the value at 14 for defensive players is not great.
Yeah. We'll see.
Exactly.
I mean,
plenty of time.
These things change.
Exactly.
I'm just saying this having the second pick there makes this process easier. Because if they only had Denver's pick at 3, that makes taking a quarterback real hard, because your defense needs so much work. And a Jalen Carter sitting there for you to take, and you could do it.
Honestly, I'll just be completely honest, and it might be irrational, but that's my worst fear, is a guy like Jalen Carter could be game record defensive tackle that I've literally wanted on this team since who knows when. And we take a quarterback. It reminds me of this whole Creed Humphrey, Dwayne Eskridge situation in a way. It's like Creed Humphrey's there. He's the sure thing. He looks like a perennial Pro Bowler, and he hasn't even played it down in the NFL. We pass on him. We draft Eskridge. Eskridge comes onto the roster. It's a playmaker. And it didn't work. And that's my fear. Jalen Carter goes on to have perennial Pro Bowls, and we draft a quarterback that plays marginal at best. It's so hard to evaluate quarterbacks that are going to actually work in the NFL.
Yeah, but then look at other really top defensive players. Clowney was,
I know.
this the most anticipated defensive end like in a decade, and he's bounced around the league because teams are realizing he's not worth it. He doesn't move the needle in terms of wins and losses, right? Ndamukong Suh was amazing for the Lions. How many games did that win them? Not a lot, right? You've got these really good players on defense that don't result in wins and losses, right? Now you put a quarterback in there so the offense does something. You give them a little bit more talent around them, and then they, blow up and are amazing. But because that's what happened in LA, right?
You roll the dice at the quarterback position and you hit, you're rolling for 10 years. Mm-hmm. But if you miss, you miss. Yeah, it's one of those things where I agree. I'm getting closer to you because of the lack of draft capital on a yearly basis, and this is the moment where we've got the most draft capital and a need at the quarterback position. It could be the year that we draft a quarterback high, and even though we have a really premier need on the defensive side of the ball, maybe they just try to address that as best as they can. Maybe it's that 14th pick overall, maybe it's in the second round or whatever, and maybe it's in free agency. But you can't really address those things outside of that early pick in the first round. Mm-hmm. It's true.
It's like getting a franchise left tackle. Franchise left tackles, they're never on the market, and you typically cannot get one outside of the top 15. That's why when Seattle was there and they were picking 9, they knew what they needed to do. They needed to grab one. And so they did. Now they kind of lucked into the fact that a right tackle of equal talent was there in the 3rd, but left tackles, they're just impossible to get unless you're drafting high. Quarterbacks are the same way.
All right, so let's wrap this thing up. What are we doing on our next show? Are we going to do some detective work and come back with why the offense failed so much in this last 5 out of 6 games?
It's been so good. It was so good at the beginning of the year. We could trust that this game, they were going to score 30 points. This was a 30-point-a-game offense that just moved the ball. Teams had to stop them. It was a question of our defense, get enough stops to, allow us to win the game. But the defense was the question. The last few games, it's, there was a point where the Seahawks going to get more than 3 points against Kansas City, and Kansas City's not a great defensive team. Mm-hmm. They're a good offensive team and an average defensive team. And they dominated Seattle for the first half. So I really think a more in-depth dive into what's gone on, what changed for this offense to go from one of the best in the NFL to one of the worst, in the midseason.
Yeah, crazy. All right, let's get out of here. Come back with that show. We'll also come back even later in the week with our 3rd show with a preview of the Jets visiting the Seattle Seahawks. I think that's a New Year's game, right? New Year's.
Yes, it is.
Day game. So that'll be fun. You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NWCHawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. SeahawksPlaybook.com is the website. You can find us on your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWCHawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.